Welcome everyone to CTE at the middle school level as part of our grant series for 2023. Excited to just go through some overviews of what CTE can look like at the middle school level. We also, over the summer, last summer, we did a whole day workshop on this. And so hopefully as you apply for funds for your CTE programs at the middle school level, once you have been awarded those funds, then in the spring, we'll do another one of those workshops where we can get you and the whole team that needs to do the work together to really talk through the action steps you'll need to take it from grant to implementation, right? So as you get into this, don't worry, we will be alongside you once the work here is done with grant writing. The work continues in implementation. So the big question is, what does career readiness even look like at the middle school level? A lot of folks think about career readiness and they may not realize that you can have CTE at the middle schools, but you can also have other initiatives. And so there's a few different lenses that we can look at when it comes to career readiness at the middle school. Let me just shut my door real quick. All right, so first we're going to talk about what does career technical education look like today. If you're not familiar, there are 15 different industry sectors that the state has outlined are part of what we call CTE or career technical education. In each one of these sectors, each one of these little dots is a specific full pathway that you should have 300 hours at the high school level for those students. And so as you're thinking about what program you want to offer, you have to dial all the way down to one of these bullet points in one of these sectors. And for each one of these bullet points, there's a full set of standards that you'll need to meet as part of your overall pathway experience. If you're going to put some of those classes at the middle school level, then you can get some of the introductory concepts in, but you still need those 300 hours at the high school level. The middle school does not count for your concentrator or capstone, but it can be a great intro course. When we look at how we define our pathways, we're going to categorize them for the state as introduction, concentrator, or capstone. A pathway completer has to do the concentrator and the capstone, and the intro course is actually kind of an optional if you want to have a 3-year course or something you can put in the middle school. We have CalPADS codes that actually code to each one of those different definitions, each one of those pathways, each one of those sectors. And so that's how the state knows whether a student completed those different pathway courses in order to make them a pathway completer on the college and career indicator and for other related metrics. And so to be a CTE pathway, the courses must be taught by CTE teachers credentialed in that sector. However, in middle school, we'll talk about that one exception when we look at the middle school wheel. So like I said, a traditional pathway might be intro, concentrator, and capstone. And a normal year will have about 160 hours, right? If you're in a 4x4, it might be a little under. That's not something to worry about. But here's a kind of traditional CTE pathway. But what we see at the state level is that the minimum standard actually drops that intro, which makes it a really nice place to put into middle schools, right? Because the middle school CTE time does not count towards their CCI status as a completer. You want to wait and put those concentrators and capstones in at the high school, which means middle school can be a great intro spot. All those courses, though, have to be in the same pathway within the same industry, right? So if we go back up to our picture here, let's say we were talking about an engineering pathway, engineering design, that means all of the courses to be considered a pathway have to all be just in engineering design. You can't flip-flop into the other areas. Now, can you have an engineering design pathway that has an environmental lens? Absolutely, as long as you're hitting the engineering design pathway outcomes. And that's a really interesting example because environmental engineering itself sometimes doesn't speak to engineering the same way we think of engineering design. And so I do see engineering design pathways with an environmental twist, sometimes more than just the environmental engineering pathways. All right, back to where we were. Again, there's a lot of information about CalPADS coding, and that is like a whole nother workshop. But there is more information on that here in this link that gets deeply into coding and CalPADS and all that exciting jazz. What we do know also about CTE is that they incorporate a wealth of resources, objectives, and ways to engage students. The QAPJAC, which is the Career Workforce Pathways Joint Advisory Committee, which is the state's kind of lead on pathway work between the Chancellor's Office and the State Board of Education. They have the 12 essential elements that they have outlined in CTE. We also see the previous iteration, the 11 essential elements, which is still part of the legislation behind the CTE incentive grant, which is why these same topics just overlap in different ways within the two different lists of elements. But that self-study, that self-evaluation that you do, that's called attachment 1 for CTE incentive grant, it is covering all of the essential elements that we talk about. So like, they don't want to just fund CTE. And one example would be, historically, a lot of schools turned their photo 1 into a CTE class, and then they might have like a dozen sections of photo 1 that are not aligned to anything that's industry focused. And then they might have one section of like a graphic design that uses that as their photo 2. And that just shows that they're not really looking and focused on that pathway, that career readiness. You want to make sure that even if you're transitioning a course that previously wasn't CTE into CTE, CTE starts with career. And so the goal of the programs that you're building need to be career readiness. And it's going to focus on all of these different elements when it comes to the priorities that we see in providing a high quality career ready program for our students. Now let's hone in then on middle schools and what CTE can look like there. There are two main CTE program styles that you can see at a middle school. One would be that intro course that I've talked about, and that would be that you pick one of these sectors and you do an intro, and that can cover all of it. So maybe you do that engineering and architecture, and you have introductory concepts for all of the pathways in that kind of bubble or in that sector. Another really common and a little bit easier to do plan is the wheel course. So a middle school wheel should cover 3 or more different industry sectors. And you can have one teacher who teaches one course that kind of hits all of those different sectors. You can have like 4 teachers and they each teach one of these different pieces, and the kids rotate and wheel through them. That's why it was called a wheel originally. So you can do a few different things where the kids are wheeling through different teachers and getting these experiences, or you can have one teacher who kind of runs that whole wheel themselves. And there's a few different models for that. So when we look at an introductory CTE course, this is in one sector, sometimes in a single pathway, but it can be across a few pathways in that sector. And it needs to be aligned to the model curriculum standards for that sector or pathway. In this case, because it's in one single sector, the instructor must be CTE certified in that sector. This is something that we see often in spaces where the high school and middle school can share an instructor, right? So if you're high school, if you have one extra period where that instructor can go down and do a middle school intro course, that's powerful stuff, because now those kids are really have buy-in and are really likely to be able to move into that high school. If you aren't doing it like that, then those instructors should really connect, right? You don't want to just have a standalone intro course. I think that sometimes, okay, you're a middle school and you're like, oh, I really love culinary and we want to make a culinary intro course. Well, if there's nowhere for kids to go with that, then it becomes kind of like a community disappointment, if you would, right? So the kids finish middle school and they're excited for the next level, and there are no more next level options at the school that's maybe their designated school that they feed into. And so the real power is to make sure you're aligning the things that you're offering at middle school with the things that are available at the high schools that your students are most likely to attend. So in smaller settings, right, like let's say in a high-tech high, which I visited this week, right, that the middle and the high on the same campus, you might have really nice alignment there. It's a little bit more difficult seeing Grossman on the call, where there are a number of different middle school districts that feed into their high school district. And so having those relationships has to be much more intentional, because they have to drive across town, work district to district, and do that alignment in a meaningful way. So sometimes as you're thinking about your program work, it's not just about funding the teacher and the equipment, but it can be funding the relationship that you need between the middle and high school in order to make this successful. Right? So if it's on one campus, maybe it's extra duty hours so that those two can get together after school, once a week for an hour and have their own professional learning community. If it is school to school, it may be transportation, it may be pullout days, it may be, again, just planning time that you are funding and that the middle school district is funding, so that those two teachers could meet at least quarterly to talk about how alignment can be leveraged for these students. And so when you're talking about an intro course that's in one area, it's really important to see that alignment is really strong. And again, this CTE instructor needs to be certified in the sector they will teach in. A good example here that I've linked, Carlsbad, we did a tour there this last year and looked at their Aviara Oaks Middle School construction and broadcasting programs. And so I have that link here in case you want to kind of take a look through. They actually have some slide decks that cover these, and this is specifically at their middle school. So you may find those to be helpful resources as you plan. All right, the other area that we see middle schools focusing on is the wheel course. Now, when you use CalPADS code 9236, what will happen is it always pings an exception, but it is meant for this scenario where a generic credentialed teacher can then teach this course. All right, so it should cover 3 or more industry sectors. So what you could see is something where maybe there's some coding, you get some coding bots, some graphic design. You can use a lot of free online things like Canva to do some work there. And maybe you have a culinary piece, right? So you can have the students wheel through multiple experiences. They can also rotate through lots of career areas. So what I have showcased here, and there's actually 2 podcasts about it on my podcast from last year. So The Future Starts With You, episodes 6 and 7, focus on the work that happened at this is up in Rancho Minerva Middle School in Vista, and they actually adopted something called Paxton Patterson. And so you can see here 4 of the modules. Paxton Patterson, I think you can get anywhere from, well, you could get as many modules or few as you want, but I think they have, at least 20 different modules that you can have, and the students rotate through them, and it's self-driven for each of those programs. And so one teacher is kind of more of a project manager of all the students, and the students go through and are at the same time, they're all working on different sectors and rotating through themselves. And so they're able to have a broad range of career exploration. If you're doing a wheel, again, you want to really be thoughtful about where your students are headed. So if I were you, I would start by going, where are my students going to go to high school? And what are whether it's CTE or other programs, right? Maybe you have a robotics program after school at your high school and you don't have a high school course. That still is valid to include that in your wheel, because there's somewhere for the students to continue to gain skills as they continue in that pathway, right? And so as we go through this, the students are exploring those areas. They rotate between teachers. They have one teacher, so they can either rotate between teachers or have one teacher across programs. And again, they don't have to be CTE credentialed. And so as we think about that, and I encourage you to check out that that podcast if something like this sounds good to you. The teacher who teaches this is one guest. The podcast, the episodes are only 20 minutes, so it's not a terrible undertaking of having to hear me drone on and on. And so it's faster than this webinar, and kind of gives you a little bit of insight, talking to the principal there and the teacher who runs this lab. When it comes to credentialing at the middle school level, right, if you did want to do that intro course, just remember a few things. And I don't know that I have a slide on credentialing, but I had a question in the chat. CTE teachers can actually come straight out of industry. They don't have to have a traditional CTE, or not CTE. They don't have to have a traditional credential. And to get the CTE credential, you actually get hired, and then you enter the credential program online while you teach. And so you can pull a teacher out of industry pretty easily. You can also look at all of your staff, and I encourage you to survey your staff. Don't just go, one district was saying, oh, we just did an audit of all of the credentials of our teachers. I'm like, well, that doesn't really help, because what you really need to audit is their industry experience. Because if a teacher has anywhere between 1 and 3 years of experience in one of those industries, they may be eligible for that credential. Normally, you need 3 years of experience if you're coming straight out of industry. If you've been teaching for a while, you only need 2 years of experience, or 2,000 industry hours. If you have an advanced degree, you only need 1,000 hours, right? So you may have teachers who in the past taught in worked in industry, right? I knew a teacher who used to work in environmental surveying, right? And so then he was able to use his teaching experience because that's more current, plus his environmental surveying background, in order to get that energy, environment, and utilities credential. So understanding what industries your teachers have taught in the past may also be a great starting point for what programs you might want to offer. Now, it's not only in school that we can have career readiness. So after school programs are a great place to align this work. And so if let's say you're doing this middle school wheel and you put in an awesome STEM lab, you've got a maker space, you have all these resources. How are you leveraging that for your students outside of school hours? So your after school program may be another place that you can really leverage time with students. I don't have photos with permissions of middle school programs doing that, but every summer I run an auntie camp with my niece and nephew. And I like to make all the fun things we do just a little bit school-like, or just sneak in some of that computational thinking, right? So we do these huge paper airplane competitions every year, and it's all about they do multiple trials. We measure everything. We're measuring time, we're measuring distance, a variety. We're measuring accuracy versus precision, and they're doing multiple trials. And so by creating a really fun activity that you could do, I've done some talks with after school folks and done this with after school staff, where you take paper airplanes, you have these aeronautics competitions, and you turn it into a math lesson in disguise. DNA extraction is another great fun activity you can do. It's very messy and squishy, but you can really talk about, all right, how many strands of DNA do you think are in this pile of snot right here? Because DNA kind of comes out in kind of like a little ball of, looks like snot, right? And so the kids have a great time doing these, but then you can talk about careers in aeronautics. What does it mean to be aerodynamic? What kinds of careers are aerodynamics really important? Or careers in biotech and understanding genomics, right? That DNA extraction, you can get a ton of resources from Illumina to support DNA extraction. And they actually send out kits usually every year for DNA Day. So there are some great ways to incorporate more career-minded work outside of our formal programs. And there's actually a whole hub of resources from our after school or expanded learning team. When you are diving in, there are other ways to really support your school in addressing career readiness. And one of those is integrated curriculum. And so this is where your core academic teachers are really being thoughtful about those career programs that you have. This is going to be a huge focus of the Golden Pathways Initiative, which LEAs will be eligible to apply for as early as January of next year. And this is where you're really helping your core academic teachers teach with career integrated into their course. All right. So for me, when I was in the classroom, I actually taught chemistry. I taught medical chemistry, built the medical chemistry program. And for me, I got to do more because the site where I was at, I didn't have cohorted students. I had a CTE partner, and then I had me teaching med chem. We had a medical biology teacher. We had anatomy and physiology. So all of us, what we really did is we overlapped our work, right? Early in my career, when I was at High Tech High, where we cohorted students, that's where you can get into that kind of shared and interdisciplinary work. And if you theme that with career, that's a really powerful piece, right? And so depending on if you are in a traditional space, you can still do this without all the cohorting and the structure that that you kind of see in some of those transform spaces. But if you're in a transform space, how are you making sure that those projects have your students' future in mind? How are you ensuring that students are really building skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities that will leverage into industry so that they see, why am I learning about moles in chemistry, right? Well, let's talk about how that affects, when we talk about molarity of a solution, and if you were to inject that as a medical treatment, that can go really poorly if you don't have it all right. So it's very powerful for students to see that you don't just have to have CTE to see where careers can be leveraged, but you can do that in all of your classes. So, and all that medical chemistry or medical curriculum, there's actually middle school curriculum, and I have that linked later in the slide deck. Project-based learning is another excellent way to incorporate career readiness as long as you are focused on that. So our region actually created a project-based learning framework that is non-proprietary, so anyone can use it. There's a bunch of resources at sdcoe.net/PBL. And this summer I did a couple of PBL workshops you can see down here, and likely more to come in the next year. And so project-based learning is another place. But to do that, what you want to do in your grant is write in time for your teachers in the summer to do that work, because PBL takes time. Write and say, like, okay, for me to send 3 teachers to a project-based learning institute, even if it's offered for free, I should pay them, right? So how are you funding summer work next summer as part of your grant application? So this is kind of an overview of that framework, and I just want you to be thoughtful about that bigger planning. Work-based learning is another area of impact. This is anytime industry is engaging with students in or out of the classroom. We actually send out email all the time with work-based learning opportunities for students. If you are not already on that list and get regular emails from Alex Becker, you can email Lydia, lidcampos@sdcoe.net, to be added to that email list. And we do keep a database of those ongoing opportunities so that you can kind of look through and see what works, what might be something you want to include. And so just thinking about how industry connects to school is an essential part of what you should be applying for in any of these grants. You can fund things like buses for field trips. You may be able to fund part of someone whose job it is to put together work-based learning experiences, right? And that kind of a thing, maybe some counselor time so that they can focus on work-based learning as well. There's a continuum of work-based learning where we kind of go from like a low level of guest speakers all the way up to things like apprenticeships and internships. So in the course of their academic career, they should be able to move along this continuum. And so the younger the students are, the more we should be focused on self-awareness and career exploration and career awareness. And then as they continue in those concentrator and capstone classes, they get more into that career prep and career training. One great example of folks who have embraced career exploration in the K-8 space is Cajon Valley. Cajon Valley focuses strongly on the RIASEC. This little video gives you an overview if you're not familiar with the RIASEC, but they have shared some resources that are free that you might find helpful at the elementary or middle level. And so one thing you could fund for your grant is things like training, like how are you doing maybe a pull-out day or a summer day where you're really going through all of the different resources. If you have Thrively or Zello or something of that nature, I also encourage you to think about, all right, do we need to have workshops and training around implementation of the tools that we've already paid for? And if so, how can you fund that with your grants? I talk a lot about ikigai or your purpose. Ikigai is a Japanese term meaning reason for being. And we want our students to find that in the course of what they do. And so as we think about how this fits in their middle school experience, these are just some of the bullet points that you might think about. But this is a whole nother presentation that I often do. And I just like to reframe our thinking that it's not just about getting our students a job. It's about making sure our students find that reason for being, that they don't go to a job they hate every day. A lot of our kids don't know people who love their jobs. Their family doesn't love their job. They don't know it's an option to love their job. What are we doing to help them? And in middle school, this what you love piece can be huge. Help them understand their strengths, interests, and values. They're all squirmy wormy and they don't actually they're trying to find themselves in so many ways. And so, instead of a lot of times in school, it's like, you did bad at this, we're going to give you more. All right, what are you good at? I want every kid to be able to answer the question, what are you good at? I ask it all the time in workshops, and even teachers are a little bit like, oh, how do I answer that? But we should be really proud of the things that we're good at, and our students should be able to talk to that. And I think middle school is a great place to start those conversations, to really encourage them to understand that they are good at things, even if it's not that assignment I gave them, but there are many other things that they're good at in the world. I talked a lot about high school alignment, but again, know those programs that your students are likely to attend. Bring in high school students to work with your middle school students. That's really a powerful way to align, even if you're at different districts. So right in Grossmont, if you are working with that middle school, have your students field trip down to the middle school. You can fund that in the grants in order to do activities with those kids, talk about the program with those kids, because we can talk until we're blue in the face, and it doesn't matter as much as another kid talking about how awesome it is to be in this program and the things that they learn. Also think about, could you hold your staff meeting elsewhere, right? So at the high school, if you invited the middle school to come and do a staff meeting at your campus, it might get them up there to see what you have going on. They could tour all of your programs, and vice versa, having your high school go and maybe have a staff meeting at the middle school. When I was in the classroom, every year we had a joint professional learning, when we had the PLCs, we had a joint meeting every year between our science staff and the middle school science staff. And that was a great time to just talk about wow, when they get into high school, here are the things that wouldn't it be nice if they could do better? Or the middle school talking about, oh, here are the cool things that we're doing, so that we're not replicating those at the high school, but we could also build on them, right? So that alignment can be very powerful. And also at Oceanside High, they have these awesome pirate days, because they're the pirates, where they bring all the middle schoolers up to the high school during the day. They get to go visit every single one of the CTE programs and do little activities in them. And then that evening they have pirate night, where the parents get to come and kind of experience some of the same things. And kids get a bonus if they bring their parents back later that day and showcase what they did. So these are all things that you can write into your grants as you're thinking about how you're going to build those middle school programs, and how you're going to really target your marketing and recruitment to ensure that your middle schoolers are familiar with your program. Middle school is not too soon to think post-secondary. You want to make sure they know the many options that are available at the 4 and 2-year community, 4-year universities, 2-year colleges, what apprenticeships and military. If you have a program at your high school, you want your kids to see where that path leads, because that path leads in so many directions. And so bringing in those guest speakers, having campus tours, engaging college students in tutoring and mentoring. You don't just have to have speakers from industry. You can also bring in a panel of students to talk about the program. Sometimes the most powerful panel will be a community college student, a university student, somebody who's in an apprenticeship, maybe even someone in a job who's early on, because they have, it's a little less daunting. Like, oh, well, this 50-year-old professional has a really different journey that they took compared to our students today. And so how do we also provide our students to see other people who are just a little ahead of them in that path? Here's a bunch of resources. So California Educators Together has tons of curriculum, course outlines, the whole 9 yards, focus on CTE, because it is what CTE Online used to be. Everybody else in California wanted it, so they turned it into an all-state open educational resource. You can find resources at the California Career Resource Network. This HASP is the Health and Science Pipeline Initiative, and that has all that medical middle school lab curriculum. California Career Zone is great, essential skills. And then at the middle school level, we do see Project Lead the Way and Paxton Patterson often adopted as curriculum packages. They come with quite a price tag, but it's kind of like a off-the-shelf answer to some of the projects that you might want to do. We also see Zello and Thrively often adopted as some of the software that folks use. And we always love to hear what else is out there. So if you have adopted something else in your middle school space, or you see something else out there, please let us know so we can include those resources. Here's just future reading as if you have time for that. Margie is going to talk briefly about the curriculum, the continuum, if you want to talk about that, Margie. And you're on mute. Oh, no, you can't unmute. All right, I'll talk about the continuum. So this is kind of all the things I talked about and more. The region came up with a continuum that you can see. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, that focuses on curriculum, career research, work-based learning, and post-secondary engagement. So this is just about everything you could ever do in a middle school to address career readiness. So one great activity to do while you're planning your grant is go through, highlight everything you're already doing in green, highlight everything you want to work on in yellow, and then see where those yellows fit in your grant application, right? We also know that if you choose everything as a to-do, you won't get any of it done. And so it is really important for you to really focus in on a few areas of impact over the next year. Do those and then think, okay, 5 years from now, I want to do all this yellow. So what do I need to do next year in order to make that happen? And then go after funding for that. So this is a great tool to use with your team. The self-evaluation is somewhat helpful, but it's a little bit in the weeds. So when you get into your bigger team, this can sometimes be a little bit more of a friendly way to do some goal setting than that bigger self-evaluation. And you can see here, this is all considered the middle school continuum, and there is also a high school continuum as well. And this is adapted from a 4-page continuum that is part of the regional plan for the consortium. So this is also how you can align to the regional plan when you are looking at your K-12 SWP, because this is their continuum in a 1-page document. Dun, dun, dun. All right. There are some interesting ideas from middle school, things that I did with counselors around how they have done career readiness. So if you are looking for individual ideas, there's just some random things that people have put in this document that you might want to peruse. And I think if you're trying to figure out your district feeder schools, this is a list of everyone's CTE pathway link. And also for your post-secondary link where you can more easily find some of the career programs that our community colleges here. And then this is our labor market information, as well as obviously our four-year universities. All right, that brings us to the end. 35 minutes. So almost made it in 30, but it's hard. There's so much information. You don't have to do this alone. Margie is going to be leading the force on a K-12 SWP consortium application. Any LEA is welcome to join in on that consortium. And so you can register at this link. I'm going to drop that in the chat. If you would like to join on September 5th, a webinar that will talk more about how to join a consortium application. And so particularly those of you who are pathway coordinators, if you have LEAs you're supporting who are interested in that, send them to this, the webinar. You can also send them the recording of the webinar I am just finishing now. And so the consortium means you still have to make a budget. You still have to do the self-evaluation, but you'll get a lot more central supports. You'll have grant writing support. We'll be doing a lot of the kind of generic grant writing, and then everyone only has to write this much because all of those plans have to fit together into one application. And so for those who are new to it, that's great. And also if you're a middle school who's already been part of a consortium for maybe 1 or 2 sites and you want to expand, come on in and you can expand your work to new sites as well. All right, so that is the end of the content. So I am going to stop the recording and then we'll just go to Q&A time. Thank you.